the scream tore through the palace courtyard before anyone understood what they were looking at. Nancy stood frozen in the middle of the ceremony grounds, her bridal beads still catching the morning light, her hands trembling in front of her as though she no longer recognized them as her own. Around her, the people who had raised her, fed her, sung beside her at every festival of her life. They were backing away from her. "Who let this stranger into the courtyard?" Someone shouted. Nancy's chest heaved. "It's me!" she said, her voice cracking. "It's Nancy! Please, look at me!" No one looked at her the way they used to look at her. Not one face softened. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Somewhere behind the wall of frightened villagers, a woman named Elizabeth stood very still, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her face arranged into perfect, convincing shock. If anyone had looked closely, really looked, they might have caught the smallest flicker at the corner of her mouth, something that did not belong on the face of a grieving best friend. But no one was looking at Elizabeth. Everyone was looking at the stranger wearing Nancy's wedding beads, screaming Nancy's name. Before we go further into this story, if tales like this move you, tales of betrayal, curses, and the long, slow arrival of justice, take a moment to subscribe, tap that like button, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Because what happened to Nancy is the kind of story that stays with you long after the fire burns down. 3 months earlier, no one in the kingdom would have believed that Nancy, sweet, humble Nancy, raised by her grandmother in a small mud brick compound at the edge of the village, could ever become the center of such chaos. She was not born into wealth. She owned no gold, no fine cloth, no royal blood. What she owned was a voice so pure that farmers stopped their work in the fields to listen when she sang on her way to the river, that birds gathered on the roof of her grandmother's hut in the evenings as though they, too, wanted to learn her melody. Her grandmother, the whole village simply called her Mama Nancy, had raised her since she was a small girl, after Nancy's parents were lost to a fever that swept through the lowland villages one terrible rainy season. Mama Nancy taught her granddaughter 2 things above all else: work with honest hands, and never let bitterness live in your heart, no matter what the world takes from you. Nancy listened. She grew into a young woman known throughout the kingdom, not just for her voice, but for the way she carried herself. Humble in a world quick to reward pride. Kind in a world that often mistook kindness for weakness. It was the great harvest festival that changed everything. Every year, King Agada summoned the entire kingdom to the palace grounds to give thanks to the ancestors for the season's harvest. Drumming, dancing, and at the center of it all, the sacred harvest hymn, sung only by the maiden chosen months in advance for the honor. That year, the chosen singer collapsed backstage only moments before the ceremony began, her throat swollen, her voice gone entirely. Panic spread through the royal elders like fire through dry grass. To cancel the hymn was to insult the ancestors themselves, an omen the kingdom could not afford. "Send for Nancy," someone in the crowd called out. "Let Nancy sing." She did not want to. Her knees shook as she was led to the center of the courtyard, thousands of eyes pressing down on her like a physical weight. But when she opened her mouth, the fear disappeared, swallowed whole by the song rising out of her. The courtyard fell utterly silent. Even the palace drummers, men who had played through storms, through wars, through the deaths of kings, lowered their hands and simply listened. A hush falls over the entire courtyard. When the final note faded into the sky, King Agada rose slowly from his throne, his face unreadable for a long moment before breaking into open astonishment. "This," he said, loud enough for the whole courtyard to hear, "is the voice of a pure heart. From this day, she is the sacred maiden of the harvest." The crowd erupted. Women ululated, children ran circles around her, laughing. And somewhere near the front of the gathering, A young prince named Sebastian stood very still, watching Nancy the way a man watches something he is afraid to blink and lose. He was not looking at her beauty, though she was beautiful. He was watching the way her hands shook even after the applause began. The way she seemed almost embarrassed by the very adoration she had just earned. It was humility he had never seen inside the palace walls, where everyone around him postured and performed. Beside Sebastian, hidden in the crush of bodies, stood a young woman named Elizabeth, Nancy's closest friend since they were girls, small enough to share one wrapper between them. Elizabeth clapped. Elizabeth smiled. Elizabeth even wiped what looked like a proud tear from the corner of her eye. But something colder had already begun to move beneath her ribs. A single, quiet thought, small as a seed dropped into dry soil. Why her, and not me? She did not know yet what that seed would grow into. She only knew that for the first time in her life, watching her best friend's triumph felt less like joy and more like something being taken from her. That night, Sebastian could not stop thinking about the girl with the honey-colored voice. He requested a private meeting with his father the following week, a request that would set into motion an announcement no one in the kingdom would ever forget, and a jealousy that no one would see coming until it was far, far too late. The royal announcement came 7 days later, at a gathering meant only to honor citizens who had brought pride to the kingdom that season. No one expected what Sebastian was about to do. He stood before his father's throne, and King Agada, sensing something unusual in his son's posture, gave him the floor with a single nod. "I have thought about what kind of wife I want," Sebastian said, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. "Not a woman chosen for her bloodline, not a woman chosen for the size of her father's herds. I want a woman whose heart I have already seen tested and found true." He turned, walked directly through the parted crowd, and stopped in front of Nancy. Murmurs spread instantly through the gathering. "Nancy," he said, lifting a beautifully embroidered sash from the hands of a royal attendant. "Will you allow the kingdom to know you as the woman I intend to marry?" For a moment, Nancy could not speak. She looked past Sebastian to her grandmother standing near the back of the crowd, one hand pressed to her chest. She looked at the sea of faces she had known her whole life, now staring at her as though she had transformed into someone entirely new. "If it is blessed by the king," she finally said, her voice trembling, "and by the ancestors, then yes." The courtyard exploded into celebration. Drummers who had gone quiet weeks earlier during her hymn now beat their instruments with wild, joyful energy. Someone began singing. Others joined in. Somewhere in that swelling noise, Elizabeth stood clapping along with everyone else, her mouth curved into the exact shape a happy friend's mouth should curve into. She had practiced this face in the quiet of her hut, the night rumors first reached her that Sebastian intended to speak publicly. She was prepared. She was composed. She was also dying inside. Elizabeth had loved Sebastian since she was young enough to still believe love worked like a fair trade. That if you wanted something enough, and were good enough, it would eventually be given to you. She had never told a single soul, not her mother, not Nancy. She had folded the feeling small and hidden it deep, waiting for the right moment, the right sign from the ancestors, that her turn had come. Watching the sash settle onto Nancy's shoulders felt like watching that folded, hidden thing get torn open in front of the entire kingdom and set on fire. That evening, Nancy came to Elizabeth's hut, breathless with excitement, asking her to help plan the engagement ceremony, the fabric, the songs, the gifts for the royal family. "There's no one else I trust with this," Nancy said, gripping both of Elizabeth's hands. "You've known me since we were children. You have to be part of this." Elizabeth smiled and agreed to everything. For the following weeks, she helped Nancy choose cloth. She helped decorate the compound with palm fronds and woven baskets. She sat beside Nancy late into the evenings, laughing at old memories, admiring wedding gifts sent from distant relatives of the royal family. To every villager who watched them together, Elizabeth appeared to be the most loyal friend a bride could ask for. But at night, alone in her hut, Elizabeth stopped sleeping. She lay awake replaying the moment the sash touched Nancy's shoulders over and over until the image burned itself permanently behind her eyes. She began to believe, quietly, dangerously, that some terrible mistake had been made by fate itself. That she, Elizabeth, had been meant to stand where Nancy now stood, and that destiny had simply chosen the wrong woman. Jealousy, given enough silent nights to grow, does not stay jealousy for long. It becomes something else, something colder, something willing to act. She began asking questions of the older women in the village, careful, indirect questions about the kinds of things nobody spoke of openly. Ways to change a person's fortune. Ways to undo what had already been blessed. Most of the elders she approached grew quiet the moment they understood what she was really asking, and warned her, some gently, some with real fear in their eyes, that such power always demanded a price no one was prepared to pay. Their warnings did not stop her. If anything, they confirmed to Elizabeth that such power existed at all, and that was enough. It was an old woman selling cola nuts near the river crossing who finally whispered the name Elizabeth had been chasing, without knowing it. Boo-Boo, a native doctor, feared even by other native doctors who lived deep in the forest where sensible people did not go after dark. Do not seek him, the old woman warned, gripping Elizabeth's wrist with surprising strength. Whatever is troubling you, child, it is not worth what he will ask in return. Elizabeth pulled her hand free and said nothing. 3 nights later, under a moon thin as a fingernail paring, she left the village while the compound slept, walking a forest path she had never walked before, toward a shrine she had only ever heard described in frightened whispers around cooking fires. She did not yet know what she would find there. She only knew that she could not watch Nancy marry the prince and call it fate. Somewhere behind her, the village continued preparing joyfully for an engagement ceremony that Elizabeth had already quietly decided, in the darkest corner of her heart, would never take place. And deep in the forest ahead of her, something far older and far darker than jealousy was waiting to meet her halfway. The forest path narrowed the deeper Elizabeth walked, until the trees leaned so close together that even the moon's thin light could not reach the ground. Dry leaves cracked sharply under her feet with every step. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then fell silent, as though even the birds knew better than to announce her arrival. She smelled the shrine before she saw it. Old smoke, animal fat, something sour beneath it she could not name. Then the trees opened, and there it stood, a low structure built from mud and bone, carvings twisting up its support poles, cowrie shells and feathers strung across the entrance, swaying though there was no wind. Her legs told her to turn back. Her heart, hollowed out by weeks of sleepless jealousy, pushed her forward instead. "You did not come here for healing," said a voice from inside before she had even announced herself. Boo-Boo emerged from the shrine's shadow slowly, wrapped in animal skins, a carved staff heavy with charms in one hand. His eyes moved over her face the way a hunter studies tracks, reading things she had not said out loud. "I need help," Elizabeth managed, separating 2 people permanently. Boo-Boo's mouth curled, not quite a smile. Ordinary charms cannot break a love the whole kingdom has already blessed. He tilted his head. But there is someone who can, if you are prepared to pay what she asks. Wind stirs the shrine's hanging bones, clattering softly. He spoke a name Elizabeth had never heard before. Mama B, once the palace's finest royal seamstress, banished from the kingdom years earlier for rituals no one dared describe in daylight. Boo warned Elizabeth, almost gently, that walking further down this road meant there would be no walking back from it. Elizabeth thought of the sash resting on Nancy's shoulders. "I understand," she said. She did not understand. Not yet. Boo led her deeper into the forest, past the point where even the shrine's firelight disappeared behind them, until they reached a hut so overgrown with vines it looked as though the forest itself was trying to swallow it whole. Inside, an old woman sat working a needle through blood-red cloth by candlelight, never once looking up until Elizabeth was standing directly before her. "Jealousy," Mama B said quietly, still sewing. "I can smell it on you like smoke on cloth." She finally lifted her eyes. Whatever she saw in Elizabeth's face seemed to satisfy her. "There is a way," Mama B said. "But destroying an innocent life is not undone with an apology afterward, child. Are you prepared to carry that?" "I am prepared to pay anything," Elizabeth said, and her voice did not shake. Mama B set down her needle. She told Elizabeth of a veil, the very first veil ever worn in the kingdom, woven generations ago by royal priestesses for the founding queen's wedding, blessed by the ancestors as a symbol of truth and faithful love. For generations afterward, every royal bride touched it before her own wedding, believing its blessing would carry into her marriage. Boo stole it from the royal shrine many years ago. Mama B said, "Before you were born, I helped him corrupt it." Her lips curved, slow and satisfied. "It no longer blesses a bride's love. It imprisons her identity. The face does not change. The body does not change. But the moment she wears it, the world simply forgets who she is. Parents will look at their own child and see a stranger. The man who loves her will look into her eyes and feel nothing." Elizabeth felt something cold settle in her stomach. And if she takes it off? Too late by then, Mama B said. The curse does not need her to keep wearing it. It only needs her to have worn it once. There was a silence in the hut long enough for the candle to gutter. "It only takes hold of a heart that is completely innocent," Mama B continued, "which is precisely why it will work so beautifully on your Nancy. Trick her into wearing it willingly before the engagement ceremony, and by evening she will be a stranger to everyone who has ever loved her, including the prince." Elizabeth thought of Sebastian's face when he'd placed the sash on Nancy's shoulders. She thought of the way the whole kingdom had cheered for a woman who was not her. She hesitated. One breath, maybe two. Then she nodded. The morning of the engagement ceremony arrived bright and busy, the palace courtyard alive since before sunrise with women, stringing flowers and musicians rehearsing the royal procession. Inside Mama Nancy's compound, neighbors braided Nancy's hair and adjusted her bridal wrapper, laughing and singing as they worked. No one noticed the elderly trader who wandered into the yard just after mid-morning, a heavy wooden chest balanced on her hip, claiming to have traveled from a distant royal relative's household with a bridal gift too precious to send by messenger. No one recognized Mama B beneath the disguise. Why would they? Everyone was far too busy celebrating to question a kind old woman's face. "A blessing veil," she told Nancy warmly, lifting a shimmering length of cloth from the chest. "For peace. For a fruitful marriage. You need only wear it a moment." Nancy hesitated. "My garments are already prepared, Mama." "Just a moment," the old woman said, smiling so gently that suspicion felt almost rude. "One moment and I will take it right back. The ceremonial lamp flickers once, though the room is still." Nancy lowered her head. The old woman placed the veil. The room went suddenly. unnaturally cold. The lamp flickered violently, then died. A wind that should not have existed inside a closed room pressed against Nancy's chest like a hand shoving something loose from between her ribs. She gasped, tearing the veil from her head, stumbling backward. "It felt wrong," she said, breathless, holding it out. "Something is wrong with it." The old trader only smiled, folded the veil with unhurried hands, and slipped quietly out of the compound before anyone thought to stop her. By the time Nancy's neighbors turned to ask who she was, the yard was empty. Nancy did not have time to wonder. The drums were calling her towards the palace. She never made it to the courtyard as herself. The first sign came from a group of children playing near the compound gate. They took one look at her and scattered, shrieking, into their mother's arms. Then a woman who had known Nancy since infancy stepped backward, hand pressed to her mouth, whispering to a neighbor to fetch help. By the time Nancy reached the edge of the crowd, people were no longer parting for her in celebration. They were parting the way villagers part for something dangerous. "It's me," she said, again and again, her voice rising into panic. "It's Nancy." No face softened, no eyes recognized her. She ran to her grandmother's door, certain that the one person who had raised her from a child would know her on sight. Mama Nancy opened the door, looked directly into the face of her own granddaughter, and asked, with real confusion, why a stranger had entered her home uninvited. "Mama, it's me," Nancy sobbed, reaching for hands that pulled gently away. "You raised me. You taught me to sing by the river. Please." Mama Nancy felt something stir in her chest she could not name. Pity, maybe, or something deeper she had no words for. But recognition did not come. It could not come. The curse had made sure of that. Nancy ran to the palace next, pushing through the celebrating crowd until she found Sebastian standing near his father's throne. She called his name the way she had called it 100 times before, with the easy familiarity of a woman certain of being heard. Sebastian stepped in front of the royal family, shielding them from her the way one shields against a threat. "Sebastian, it's me," she begged, reaching for his hand. "You gave me the sash. You said I was the bone of your bone. Please, look at me." He looked. He truly looked. And in his chest something ached in a way he could not explain. A grief with no memory attached to it, like mourning someone he had never met. But his eyes told him only one thing. A stranger stood before him, speaking with terrifying confidence about a life that was not hers. The crowd erupts into frightened shouting. Word reached King Agada within minutes. He summoned the stranger before his throne, listened to her plead her case. The harvest festival, the sacred hymn, the sash. 100 private conversations only the real Nancy could have known. Every detail was correct, and yet no memory rose in him to match it. "An old trader," Nancy said desperately. "She gave me a veil this morning. She must have—" "No such trader entered the palace grounds," a royal servant interrupted. Villagers murmured agreement. No one had seen her. Mama B had vanished as completely as smoke. King Agada's face was heavy with the weight of a decision no father king wants to make. "Take her," he said finally, "until the truth of what she is becomes clear." Nancy was led away in chains while the courtyard watched in uneasy silence, believing, mostly, that justice had been done. That night, Sebastian could not sleep. The stranger's tears kept returning to him, uninvited, every time he closed his eyes. Against every rule of the court, he slipped past the guards and came to stand outside her cell. "Why do you keep coming back to me?" Nancy whispered through the bars, her voice raw from crying. "If I mean nothing to you, why are you here?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. "I don't know," he admitted. "Every time I look at you, I feel something I cannot explain. Grief. as if I've lost someone I never had the chance to know." "You did know her," Nancy said, gripping the bars. "You know me. Please, find the traitor, find the veil before it's too late." He wanted, more than he had wanted anything in his life, to believe her. "I cannot fight my father's judgment without proof," he said quietly, and the words cost him something visible, something that cracked in his voice as he said it. "I am sorry." He walked away into the dark, carrying a weight he could not name, leaving Nancy alone with the terrible understanding that the curse had stolen not only her name, but the man who loved her too. If this story has reached the part of your heart that remembers what it feels like to be disbelieved by someone you trusted, take a moment now and tell us in the comments. Has there ever been a moment in your life when the truth wasn't enough to save you? Like this video if Nancy's heartbreak is reaching yours tonight, because the hardest part of her story is still ahead. Days later, during a violent storm that threw the guards' torches into chaos, Nancy slipped free of her chains and vanished into the rain-soaked dark, with nowhere left in the entire kingdom to run to but the one door that had never fully closed against her. Rain hammered the thatched roof as Nancy collapsed against Mama Nancy's door, soaked through, her strength finally giving out. When the old woman opened it and found a stranger crumpled on her step, something in her still refused to turn away a suffering creature into a storm like this. She pulled Nancy inside without a second thought. The curse held firm. Mama Nancy still saw no granddaughter in the trembling young woman she dried by the fire, only a frightened stranger with nowhere else to go. But as the days passed, small things began to nag at her. The stranger knew exactly which shelf held the cooking pots. She hummed without thinking, a lullaby Mama Nancy had only ever sung to one child in her life. She spoke of childhood memories with a familiarity that unsettled the old woman in a way she could not explain. "Who are you, really?" Mama Nancy wondered, watching her sleep by the fire one night. "And why does looking at you feel like looking at something I've lost?" Miles away in the village, Elizabeth had grown reckless with victory. Nancy was gone. Sebastian's grief had cooled into cold obedience to his father's judgment. No one suspected her of anything. Convinced the danger had passed, she slipped into the forest one evening to celebrate with the two people who had made it all possible. Inside the shrine, Elizabeth laughed freely for the first time in weeks, describing how Nancy had been dragged away in chains, how Sebastian's face had crumbled when he turned his back on her. Boo-Boo warned her sharply not to grow careless. The veil's curse had a weakness, he reminded her, and if it were ever destroyed before another bride wore it, everything would unravel. Elizabeth waved the warning away with a laugh. She did not know a palm wine tapper, perched silently in the trees above the shrine before dawn, was hearing every triumphant word. Dry leaves crunch softly as he climbs down after they leave. By sunrise, the tapper stood trembling before King Agada, repeating everything, the veil, the disguise, the forbidden pact, word for word. The king did not act on rumor alone. He sent guards to search the shrine in silence, and what they found there ended any doubt. Ritual powders, carved bones, and wrapped inside an old chest, the very veil that had vanished from the royal shrine generations earlier. The royal priestesses confirmed it on sight. Elizabeth, Boo-Boo, and Mama Bee were seized before they could flee the forest. King Agada refused to settle the matter in private. He summoned the entire kingdom to witness what he had failed to see the first time. Before the crowd that had once watched Nancy dragged away in chains, the tapper repeated his testimony. The priestesses held up the veil, and one by one, the truth broke out of each conspirator like water through a cracked dam. Boo-Boo admitting he had stolen and corrupted the sacred veil years before, Mama Bee confessing to the disguise at Nancy's compound, and finally Elizabeth, sobbing, admitting that jealousy alone had driven her to destroy the one friend who had never once wronged her. A stunned silence falls over the entire courtyard. Sebastian's knees nearly gave beneath him. Mama Nancy pressed both hands to her mouth, weeping, finally understanding whose lullaby she had heard hummed by her own fire. And King Agada bowed his head, the full weight of his wrongful judgment settling over him like a stone. Because the veil had been recovered before another bride ever touched it, the priestesses declared the curse could still be broken. They carried it to the royal shrine where it had first been blessed, laid it upon the sacred stone, and began reciting the ancient words spoken over it generations before. Nancy stood before them, still unrecognized by the very people gathered around her. Mama Nancy gripping her hand and refusing to let go, Sebastian standing close enough to touch her, hoping with everything left in him that the accusations against Elizabeth were true, even though his memory still held nothing of her. As the final blessing left the priestess's lips, the veil tore itself apart from within. A wind swept through the shrine, snuffing every flame at once before relighting them an instant later. A sharp gasp rises from everyone gathered, and then, all at once, the memories returned. Mama Nancy's arms closed around her granddaughter before her mind had even finished catching up to her heart. Sebastian staggered forward. Every conversation, every promise, every stolen glance flooding back to him in a single overwhelming wave. King Agada remembered the girl whose voice had once silenced an entire courtyard, and the shame of what he had done to her nearly brought him to his knees. Nancy's face had never changed. It was the kingdom's memory that had been imprisoned all along. King Agada stood before his people one final time and did what no king in living memory had done. He apologized publicly, admitting that fear and appearances had blinded him to the truth in front of him. Elizabeth, Boo Boo, and Mama B were stripped of everything and exiled beyond the kingdom's borders forever. When some called for harsher punishment still, it was Nancy, the one who had suffered most, who asked the king for mercy, refusing to let hatred take root in her heart the way jealousy had taken root in Elizabeth's. Months later, the kingdom gathered again, this time for a wedding untouched by curses or fear. Sebastian placed the royal sash on Nancy's shoulders a second time, and this time, nothing stood between them. Before we close tonight's story, tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're carrying with you, because centuries from now, in that kingdom, mothers still tell their daughters this story by firelight, that appearances deceive, that jealousy can rot even the oldest friendships from the inside, and that truth, no matter how long it is buried, always finds its way back into the light. Here is a short summary about Nancy's story. Nancy was chosen by fate, loved by a prince, and adored by a kingdom, until a gift from a stranger unraveled it all. In an instant, the woman everyone knew became a face no one recognized. Not her grandmother, not the prince who called her his own, not even the king who once praised her voice before the entire court. Exiled by the very people who raised her, Nancy is forced to survive as a stranger in the only home she's ever known, while the friend who smiled beside her at every celebration hides the truth behind it all. The curse can be broken, but only if the truth surfaces before it's too late. Tell me in the comments briefly, what have you learned from Nancy and Elizabeth's journey so far?